The growing Chinese influence in the neighborhood is worrying in India, and the latest sore point is Sri Lanka and how Beijing's influence in the country is growing. And because of that, India is now looking to recalibrate its ties with Colombo. What are the various factors that India is taking into account to determine that China is becoming more powerful in Sri Lanka, or that Sri Lanka is leaning more towards China? And what is New Delhi now planning to do? To answer these questions, I have with me Nayanima Basu, who tracks diplomacy for ThePrint. She's done a very, very detailed story for us today. So you can log on to our website, theprint.in, to read that. Nayanima, thank you for being with us on Government Matters. Tell our viewers, send in their questions. Let me ask you some that I have listed out for you. So, it's, as I said, this Chinese influence, growing Chinese influence in the neighborhood is something that is worrying India. But today, of course, the focus is on Sri Lanka. Let's talk about the chain of events that have led India to conclude that Sri Lanka is indeed leaning towards Beijing.
Well, Ruhi, thanks firstly for talking about my story. Now, the thing is, we've been looking at this story for years now, let's say for last couple of years, mostly since the Rajapaksa regime had come in Sri Lanka. So, when the Rajapaksa brothers came in with Gotabaya Rajapaksa as the president and Mahinda Rajapaksa as the prime minister, India really saw the fact that, this coming in of the Rajapaksa brothers, who earlier, Mahinda Rajapaksa was the president, in fact, and that time also there was a tilt towards China, and that's when another major incident had happened. I'll discuss that with you. But when these two brothers, they came into power, Prime Minister Modi, India sort of, wanted to have a better relationship with Sri Lanka, which was anyway going on with the previous regime. And there was this thinking that, yes, now that India is looking at the Indian Ocean region much more with a stronger focus, and with Indo-Pacific, the fact that, the ties can be given a new approach, a new friendly approach. And that's when India had sort of come in which for Sri Lanka in the larger neighborhood policy, of course, that Prime Minister has. So, in 2019, in fact, after Gotabaya Rajapaksa became the president, he came to India. And that's when there was a lot of talk that had happened. And we've heard their foreign secretary at one point of time talking about how Sri Lanka is now looking at an India first policy, which was their active policy, right? And they said that, well, we need both our bigger neighbors like India and China. We will now do a fine balancing act between the two. And India had this hope also that, this will become a really good relationship, which it still is. I mean, let's not just assume that
Right.
it is not. But things started really, to become, they started plummeting when India lost the East Container Terminal project. It got scrapped. India is still fighting for it, so to say. But India has also been given the West Container Terminal in the Colombo port to produce, but that is more of a private deal than a G2G deal that was there between Sri Lanka, India, and Japan. So now we've seen that, the Chinese, basically what had happened last month, the Sri Lankan parliament passed a resolution, a law in which now the Chinese will be developing, it's about a $1.4 billion project under which a special economic zone will be created, and that will also, lead to creation of a Colombo port city, so to say. It will be a state-of-the-art port city where there'll be, it is expected to be a high class port city. And so that is, of course, a concern for India, because, you have China taking over literally some parts of Sri Lanka where, and let me tell you that this SEZ will have their own sort of rules, like we've also seen when the SEZ boom sort of happened in India also. So the fact that India is now concerned because, some years back, the Hambantota port was also given to the Chinese when the Sri Lankans could not, pay the debt, and it's there with them for the 99-year lease. So for India, right, having China there right at the maritime domain is sort of, it's a big concern.
Cause of worry. Right. So, Nayanima, as you pointed out the various events, the various policy decisions of the Sri Lankan government that have indicated how it is tilting towards China, or how China is becoming more powerful in Sri Lanka. how is now India planning to reshape, recalibrate, or rethink its ties with Sri Lanka?
So for India, it has always been the approach, especially we've seen under Prime Minister Modi, the focus that was talked about as the neighborhood first. It's not that this is happening for the first time. India was always focused on the neighborhood. There had been initiatives like the SARC and other things. But yes, right now for India to recalibrate, in the sense they will be looking at sort of a wait and watch approach to see where this SEZ project leads to, because we've seen also in the case of Belt and Road Initiative how many countries were signing up for it, and now slowly they are sort of backtracking when they realize that this is going to bring them under a huge debt, kind of a trap. So now the thinking is that, okay, let's see, because the Rajapaksa brothers have taken a firm decision that they will give this big projects to the Chinese. And let me tell you that, I mean, we know that the Chinese have deep pockets, right? So they can afford to do these things. However, from India's point of view, it is right now will be to see how things pan out. Because remember, as I said, with the Indo-Pacific strategy construct taking shape, India being one of the key players in Quad and also in Indo-Pacific, it is very important to have a very nice and cordial relationship with Sri Lanka. So you don't really go out and out, but then you will be having more of diplomatic negotiations and discussions happening to understand that, where all do you see India fitting in when the Chinese are coming in such a big way in Sri Lanka. And also one more point, Ruhi, the East Container Terminal, the reason that Sri Lanka had given to not to give that deal to India is because they said that there was a protest within the worker union and other things out there, that the laborers union, that India is going to take over the project, the port. So India's point is, are those concerns not coming in when it comes to the Chinese? Why these concerns come up only when the Indians get involved in a project? So that's the thing.
Okay, so this first question is from Mayank Malik. Would you say that the Rajapaksa brothers are responsible for this rift between India and Sri Lanka, and for Sri Lanka's move towards China?
So we have to also understand that this is not probably what the Rajapaksa brothers had probably also planned when they came into power. Now let's also understand that Sri Lanka has a huge debt, Chinese debt on them, for which they are even taking some kind of fiscal help, financial help from Bangladesh also, right? So
Right.
we've done that story as well, where Bangladesh is going for a currency swap arrangement to help Sri Lanka. India has also done the same. India had given about 400, $500 million. There is in the pipeline about $1 billion currency swap, agreement that India will be doing. So Sri Lanka has to, it is also in that pressure to revive the economy because of the pandemic. Their tourism sector has also undergone a huge, it has had an adverse impact. So it really needs that amount of money to pump up their economy. At the same time, the apprehensions were always there when the Rajapaksa brothers came in, that whether they will really follow an India first policy or not. So we've seen that, India making some gains when it comes to Bangladesh. See the way the Bangladesh is doing the fine balancing act, right? It is having good relationship with India. In fact, that relationship is growing. And similarly, they are also with the Chinese when it comes to doing business and developing their economy. So I think that's where Sri Lanka is not really coming up to the expectations that probably India had. And the fact that, the Rajapaksa brothers, when the Hambantota project had happened, that time also these apprehensions came in that maybe they'll tilt more towards the Chinese. And it seems that maybe that is what is shaping up right now. What exactly is going through, nobody knows. However, if you follow their local reports, it's very clear that that local people, the common Sri Lankan citizen, they are not happy with the port project. They want the government to revive the economy, come up with jobs and control the pandemic, like we all are expecting from our own respective governments. So there's a lot of opposition there as well. I mean, when the bill was passed, there was a huge in their parliament, there was a huge discussion. Opposition is still sort of not happy with the project, but it seems, and there are certain reports also coming up that the Rajapakses are doing it almost unilaterally. They have also set up single unit window mechanism, which will be only under their monitoring. So, there are many gray areas also that are being discussed that is coming up with this SEZ.
Okay. This question is from Raj. Please throw some light on the role of Beijing in the drift between Sri Lanka and India. So on one hand, it's about how much Sri Lanka, the kind of preference Sri Lanka is giving to China, the kind of policy decisions it's taking. On the other hand, the question is about how is Beijing pushing its way through?
So Beijing will, of course, try and do what it has been doing. We've been engaged with them in a very difficult military standoff since April 2020, right? So and our neighbors are very well aware about the situation that has evolved in the past 1 year. Having said that, it's true that Sri Lanka has been also, China has been there enticing our immediate neighborhood. Now, I would really not, while China, this is expected what they're doing. We know President Xi Jinping has a huge plan to create this Belt and Road, to have this sort of control over the entire continent of Asia and of course South Asia, Southeast Asia. We know his plans, right? But at the same time, when it comes to India, I think India also sort of needs to buckle up when it comes to moving ahead with some of the regional initiatives like the SAARC and other things. When you go for bigger things like Indo-Pacific Quad, the question arises, what are you doing for your immediate neighborhood? And for your immediate neighborhood, you have initiatives like the SAARC, there is BIMSTEC, there are many other things, right? So Sri Lanka has been telling India that we have a problem here. We have our economy after especially the Easter attacks. We really need to revive our economy, tourism, and other things. Then the pandemic happened. So let's just move ahead with SAARC. But Ruhi, and you know it well, that because of the problems between India and Pakistan, the SAARC initiative really never sort of took off, even under Prime Minister Modi. And of course, Beijing is doing yes to have larger control in India's immediate neighborhood. We've heard and read about the encircling policy, but maritime domain is where China never really, we never really probably expected China will come in such a big way. But look at what China is doing in South China Sea, East China Sea. Right. And of course, they have their eyes on the Indian Ocean.
Right. Okay, this is a question from Sania. I think Modi raised the issue with Rajapaksa brothers during a meeting last year. What are your views?
Yes, so all these issues were definitely raised in the sense when he had a virtual meeting with Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, and there were discussions on the East Container Terminal. External Affairs Minister was also there, despite the pandemic being there, he was there. But then the thinking was that India will get this East Container Terminal. Now, why this ECT is so important is because you have Chinese there at the Hambantota port. Chinese have a huge terminal in the Colombo port as well, which is very high class and very state of art. So India wanted a strategic positioning there for themselves as well, along with the Japanese. But, all on a sudden in the month of February, Sri Lanka took the decision that no, there's huge opposition coming in. And so, we will give you West Container Terminal. So in the West Container Terminal, we have the Adani Group now developing the terminal right from scratch. And India is expecting that maybe that will give it some sort of a leverage, although it's a private deal. But nevertheless, you use the Colombo port for your transshipment and other things. So maybe, any which way, be it through the public participation or private, India has some sort of presence there. So that is very important. Let's just see even how that project turns out. Maybe things will change, but one never knows. Also to say that India has a lot of other projects running in Sri Lanka, which I think should be completed, in a time-bound manner. Now, this is also somewhere that India has admitted herself. The Minister of External Affairs constantly keep on saying that project execution remains an area where India needs to really prove its mettle. So when it comes to our neighborhood.
Okay, so I'll take a couple of last questions. One is from a viewer who wants to know, how does India take the Colombo port snub and the unwillingness to bridge the strait?
Well, you really have to see how the bridge is, the strait is sort of bridged. But the fact is, it now all depends how things pan out with the West Container Terminal. India has not really given up hope also to again revive the Container Terminal deal. But now things have become far more difficult with the Chinese coming in, with this SEZ coming in. Of course, they will also try and have that kind of propaganda in which you will be having anti-India sentiments. And let's not forget that the Sri Lankans remember the history pretty well, right? So with the IPKF, the LTT, the civil war that they have gone in, they don't really see India in a favorable manner. But for them, the Chinese are like this, successful people coming from some mystic land. And these are exactly the words I've got to hear from my sources in the Sri Lankan government. So, India has to really work in that aspect as well, where Sri Lankans really accept you wholeheartedly.
Okay. Hitesh Nautiyal, what are the major projects of India in Sri Lanka which will be affected directly if India-Sri Lanka ties don't improve?
Well, there are several projects, and it's not that Sri Lanka has said that we don't want Indians at all. But then, as I said, that India has to complete these projects. If they cannot go on for 20, 25 years, as we have seen in, when it comes to Nepal or Bangladesh. So these are small economies. You really need to do a lot in a time-bound manner. We, at one point, even had a good trade agreement that was being negotiated between India and Sri Lanka. Nobody sort of moved in that aspect. So I think when you sort of cooperate with your neighbors and help them in their economic development, that's when they really start to take you very seriously.
Right. Okay, there's one last question. This is from Senbaga Muthu. Can we expect the coastal problem with Indian fishermen and Sri Lankan Navy arresting and attacking them to make relations between the two countries worse?
Well, I think this has always remained a very serious concern, and there has never been any kind of official dialogue mechanism on this, even if there is, it has not been seriously taken up, in the sense, whenever any incident happened, we then, diplomatically try and solve it. But I believe the issue of fishermen is a very serious issue for which both sides need to have a proper dialogue mechanism. They can meet probably once a year, or twice in 1 year. But this is an issue where India has also not spelled out to Sri Lanka what it really wants from Sri Lanka on this aspect. So yes, this also remains a very difficult area when it comes to bilateral ties between India and Sri Lanka.
All right, Nayanima, thank you for explaining to us the, I wouldn't say tensions, but the kind, slight friction that seems to be emerging between India and Sri Lanka. As the cliche goes, India has to walk the diplomatic tightrope, has to do it very, very cautiously. Just as you pointed out, how Bangladesh is managing both India and China, Sri Lanka also has to be able to do that in a diplomatic manner. So thank you so much for talking to us. A big thank you to our viewers for watching Government Matters and for sending in their questions. Do keep subscribing.